And from there, I don't know where I'm going to go after Nehemiah, but I've got about 6 or 8 weeks to figure that out. Um, I'll let you know when I know. But I'm trying to think ahead what we want to do, what book to go to. So I got 2 or 3 different things in mind, and so I'll figure it out when the time comes. How's that? Yeah, Esther chapter 8. Well, like I said, we'll finish Esther today, and it'll go pretty quick. So, um, missed last week, so if you weren't here, we got to catch up from 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago, Haman was killed by the decree of the king. We still have the decree of the king that the Jews will be killed some 7 or 8 months from this period, and so that because the Persian kings did not change their directives, so if they gave an order, it could not be changed. So the directive or the law that was put into place to have all the Jews killed in a future time, which is again from this point probably in chapter 8, probably another 8 months, that still stands. So we got to figure out what we're going to do about getting around this decree, because the king's not going to change it. So Haman has been killed, and we'll find out here in chapter 8 that all of Haman's responsibilities or realm of rule has now been given over to Mordecai. Now again, Mordecai is the uncle or cousin of Esther. I can't remember now if he was an uncle that he had taken in as a father figure because Esther's parents had died. Understand, too, that Esther is the queen. She's married to King Ahasuerus, and so she was able to do what she's done here because she found favor in sight of the king. So I'm trying to get us caught up from the last couple of weeks. I've been gone. And so today we're going to pick up essentially very soon after Haman has been killed and then hung on the gallows that he had built for Mordecai. Everybody caught up? Everybody okay with all that? All right. So Esther chapter 8, we will now begin.
Esther 8. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman.
So at this point, apparently, King Ahasuerus still did not know that Esther and Mordecai were Jews. Perhaps had he known that a few months ago, this edict from Haman wouldn't have been put out, but we don't know. But we find out here that King Ahasuerus finds out that his 2 top people are Jewish, whom he has signed a decree to have them killed some, again, 7 or 8 months from this point. Notice, too, here in verse 2 that the king took off the ring that he had given to Haman, and he gave it to Mordecai. So remember, when Haman come up with the plot to kill the Jews, the king was okay with that. We studied that, I think, back in chapter 5. And the king gave Haman all the authority to write this decree and stamp it with the king's ring. And apparently, even for the past few months, Haman has been carrying this ring. Kind of makes you wonder how good of a king Ahasuerus really was and how much he really knew what was going on in his kingdom. Now, it was interesting to me to think that perhaps there's Haman hanging off these gallows, and the king walks up and pulls the ring off his finger. Then I don't know. It just says that he took the ring off his finger, which tells me that this had to have been after he died. So I don't know. Just something that I thought about here is, is he still hanging there when the king goes and takes the ring off? But anyway, he gives now the lot and the rule of what Haman had over to Mordecai. Because again, now at this point, Mordecai is the second in the kingdom. All right? Verse 3.
And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose, and stood before the king, and said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the things seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews, which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred?
So Esther is trying to foil this plot, so to speak, or this decree. How are we going to change this decree? How are we going to escape the slaughter of the Jews that's coming up in a few months? How are we going to do that? And that's what she's concerned about here, because again, that plan still stands. Now, again, it seems funny to us, or odd, maybe not funny, but odd that this is a thing. But yet, back in the kings, the Persian kings would not change their decrees. So we're going to have we're going to give another decree to fix this problem, which we will see moving forward here. And again, notice in verse 4, Esther still cannot go into the king unless he allows her to come in. So he raises the golden scepter. I had thought about trying this at my house, but decided soon after getting the idea that I shouldn't try it. And it seems to be working out just fine that way.
At least you're not wearing a scepter.
Yeah, and I didn't have a scepter to begin with, so all I had was a curtain rod. Yeah, huh? Yeah. Anyway, so verse 7. Here's what King Ahasuerus comes up with. Verse 7.
Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews, as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name, and sealed with the king's ring, may no man reverse.
So Haman, or not Haman, but the king goes ahead and allows Mordecai to have a plan devised to counteract the plan that Haman had put out. And we see here again, reminding that Mordecai now has the authority and the king's ring to write the decree that needs to be written and to seal it with the king's ring, which shows the king's approval. Now, verse 9 of Esther chapter 8, if I remember correctly, is the longest verse in the Bible. We will see that here in verse 9.
Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is, the month Sivan, on the 23 day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and the deputies and rulers of the provinces which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to their language. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by posts, on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries.
Okay, so the king gives him the power to write this decree. The decree was written, this is in May or June time frame, and it was written and distributed throughout all the kingdom, all 127 provinces. Now, we haven't read what the decree is. That begins in verse 11. But we're getting the word out to everybody throughout the kingdom what this decree is going to say here. And again, we'll read that in verse 11. And he sends it out on horses and mules and camels and dromedaries. Now, I got to thinking, because I knew a dromedary was a camel. A one-hump camel is a dromedary. A two-hump camel is a camel. I didn't know that until this week. But I always knew that we always called dromedaries camels, but I thought, well, what's the difference? Because it's listed here. I don't know. What would be harder to ride? Probably a one-hump. I don't know. Two-hump, you just sit in the middle of it, right? Or would you sit on one of the humps?
No, you sit in the middle.
That'd be a two-passenger. Yeah. Now, one thing I also did learn about dromedaries, they are made, or they are in the hotter climates, and the camels are in cooler climates. Now, again, I didn't mean to make a biology lesson here, but that's...
I thought so.
That's what they said.
I didn't research fully the reason for the humps. I did read, though, that if they get too thirsty, they run out of water, they will... Yeah, I'm not going to... Anyway, they do something with their stomach. Never mind. Anyway, Verse 11 reads out now, verse 11, Esther chapter 8, what the decree is. Here we go.
Wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people in province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely, upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies.
All right, so the decree is that now the Jews can defend themselves against anyone who would have come and attacked them on this 13th day of the month Adar, which, now that I've said that, I forgot to look and see. We talked about when that was. I think that was in February and March. So we still have some time here. I think that's when Adar is in February, March time frame.
The camel's humps store energy-rich fat, not water.
Oh, there you go.
So,
All
therefore,
right.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
In cooler temperatures.
All right.
Sorry, go on.
So that the decree is that now the Jews can defend themselves, and they can take the spoils of those that they kill. Now remember that the original edict was for people to go and kill the Jews and take their spoil, and that spoil was to be given to the king or to the treasury. Well, now the Jews are able to fight back, defend themselves, to kill whoever attacks them, and take the spoil of the ones they kill. Okay? Seems... Yeah, what's that? Adar is April? Okay. Okay. Okay, there you go. All right, verse 13.
So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment. And the decree was given at Shushan, the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light, and gladness, and joy, and honor. And in every province, and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them.
All right, so we do see here that this was a good news decree for the Jews. They recognized that this was something that God has spared them, this defeat of Haman's ploy. And we also see here that because of this decree, many people became Jews for the fear of the Jews. Now perhaps, and I got to thinking about this, perhaps those folks that had lived in among the Jews in captivity had known about all that God had done for the Jews in years past, centuries past, getting them through the Red Sea, taking them through the Jordan River, taking them through and conquering Canaan land, all these exploits that God did on behalf of the Jewish people. Perhaps now that this decree is put out, people are understanding that the God of the Jews is more than just a God made of wood and gold and silver. That perhaps the God of the Jews is someone that we ought to heed and worship. Because it does say here, many people became Jews or followed the Jews because of this decree. And again, I think it perhaps could be them seeing the hand of God upon the Jewish people here. But we do know, we will read here in chapter 9 just now how these plots go against with each other, and we'll see the Lord working here in chapter 9. Any questions for chapter 8? Esther itself, it's very easy to follow. It's a very easy narrative. There's really not a lot of, I don't want to say it this way, but I don't know how to say it. There's not a lot of hidden truth. You just read the narrative and it tells you what's going on. And so it is a very easy book to follow through. All right, well, with that, we'll go to chapter 9 in Esther.
Esther 9. Now in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, of the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them. But the fear of them fell upon all people, and all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants and the deputies, and officers of the king, helped the Jews because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them.
So we see here, the Jews have gathered. They fought back. They've gathered. They are looking to make sure they're defending themselves. Now, I can't say for certain whether there were rogue Jews that went out and killed without being attacked, but we see here that the people are helping the Jews because they're afraid of Mordecai and the power that Mordecai has. All right? The Jews, the enemies of the Jews, there at verse 1, it says, the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it turned on the contrary. And the Jews had rule over them. Again, we see the hand of God protecting his people. Now, they were here because of the exile, some perhaps 100 and some odd years prior. That's why they're even in the province of Persia in Shushan. But the God had taken care of them even while they were in captivity and allowing them to go back to Jerusalem in the first place. But now those that are still scattered among the captivity are still being cared for by the Lord because of the protection that the Lord has given them and how it's turned to have Esther and Mordecai both in great power in the kingdom of Persia. All the rulers, at verse 3, all the rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants and all these folks, they helped the Jews. So again, we see even the so-called enemies of the Jews turning and helping them. Verse 4.
For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. But this man, Mordecai, waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with a stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men.
So even in just the capital city alone, there were 500 people that were killed by the Jews. Kind of makes you wonder what King Ahasuerus was doing while all this was going on. You know, did he? Again, I don't think he had much of a clue on anything that was going on in his kingdom. Just my opinion here. So he may not even know this is even happening. Who knows? Now, verses 7, 8, and 9. These are the names of Haman's sons. Now, Janet asked a question about Haman's sons back in chapter 7. So apparently Haman's sons were allowed to live up until this day of slaughter. Okay? And we will read here verses 7 following about what happened to them.
And Pereshandatha, and Dalphon, and Aspartha, and Poratha, and Adalia, and Aradatha, and Parmashta, and Arisai, and Aradai, and Vajezatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the sons of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, slew they, but on the spoil laid they not their hand.
So they were killed on this day of slaughter, but they didn't take, even though they were allowed by the decree of Mordecai, they did not take any of the spoil of any of these ones that were killed in this fight or this battle, these battles. The Jews did not take any of the money. I just had a thought, but I'm not going to say it. Anyway, verse 11.
On that day the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, The Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. Or what is thy request further? And it shall be done.
So again, not again, but we do see that Ahasuerus was briefed on what had happened, at least in the capital city. We see that 500 men were slain, and the 10 sons of Haman. And the king now asks, what else do you want me to do, Esther? Is there anything else you would like? Now, Esther has a surprising answer, and I don't really have an answer for it, but we'll talk about it here after verse 13 and 14.
Then said Esther, If it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree, and that Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it so to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons.
So Esther asked for a second day just in Shushan. Now, again, we don't know why. Perhaps there were still some that hadn't been killed that probably should have been, but we really don't know why she asked for a second day. But also on this second day, they went ahead and hanged Haman's sons, although they were already dead. Now, we could also say, as I read, it was the tradition. I don't know if that's the right word. The tradition of the Persians to kill a person and then to hang them as a public display. So they weren't necessarily hung by their neck like what we would picture them to be hung and then killed in that manner. But they were killed and then they were hung. Perhaps some, and I did read somewhere where they would even put them on a spear and hang them up, not necessarily by the neck, but just impale them with a spear and hang them that way. Again, just something for you guys to think about on your Sunday afternoon here. But Esther did ask for a second day of battles in Shushan, and the king allowed it to be done. And then again, they hung Haman's sons this day too. Verse 15.
But the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan, but on the prey they laid not their hand.
So we see now in Shushan alone, there were 800 men that were slain, and apparently, again, counting also Haman's sons. But this was on the second day. All right? Verse 7. And again, it says there, they didn't take the prey or the spoils of those that they killed, although they were allowed to. Verse 17.
But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together, and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 75,000. But they laid not their hands on the prey.
I think I was off a verse. That was 16, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The Jews of the other provinces gathered and stood for their lives, had rest of their enemies, and slew of their foes 75,000. So throughout all the provinces of the kingdom, there were 75,000 that were slain. Now that seems like a lot to me. Now, we do not read of any of the Jews getting killed. So we see here the hand of God upon his people to protect his people. And again, this plot to destroy them was turned, and for what we know from Scripture, none were slain. 75,000 in the kingdom were slain. Now, verse 17, right? Yeah, I got to look and I'm like, now where are we at here? Because I thought we left off there. All right, verse 17.
On the 13th day of the month Adar, on the 14th day of the same, rested they, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th day of the same they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions one to another.
All right, so we're getting ready to talk about the Feast of Purim, Purim. And we'll talk about that here in just a moment. But this was a Jewish festival that was enacted because of these actions. Still goes on today. Now, we perhaps don't hear about it like we do Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah or Passover, these other Jewish festivals. This was a Jewish festival that was instituted by Mordecai and is celebrated today because of the protection of God over the Jews because of what has happened here, what we've just read. And it's celebrated, did I not write that down? Just a minute. I looked it up, but I forgot to write it down apparently. Next year, the days of Purim, Purim, in 2026, will be celebrated Monday, March 2nd through Tuesday, March 3rd. Now, if I remember right, and I'm just now putting this together as I'm thinking about this, those were the days that the decree was signed for the execution of the Jews. Now, it was determined what date to do that by rolling a dice or choosing a lot. And okay, well, our lot says such and such a date, that's when this is all going to happen. And so that's why they celebrate this Feast of Purim, because of the way that the date was chosen was by casting of lots. And we read that back in chapter 1 a few weeks ago. But the word pur, P-U-R, means lots, or voting, basically. So we have the Feast of Purim, and I think I'm pronouncing that right, P-U-R-I-M. And again, it is a Jewish festival, and we see here it is a day of celebration because of God's protection upon the Jews. Any comments before we move to verse 20? Like, I might want to be a Jew just for all their celebrations. Anyway, well, yeah, Baptists are close. We could just about have a celebration for anything. Yeah, if we get off work. Yeah. Anyway, verse 20. We're going to be done pretty quick here.
And Mordecai wrote these things, and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor.
Sounds to me like perhaps kind of like Christmas. But I understand, too, that this was not a feast or a holiday or something that was decreed in the law of Moses. This was just something that Mordecai decreed. So this is not necessarily like some of the other Jewish festivals that were essentially decreed in the law of Moses. All right, this was something that Mordecai had decreed that this would happen. And so, again, we see here some thousands of years later, it still goes on. But it was a happy day, a good day.
And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them, because Haman the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to consume them, and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained, and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing and according to their appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book.
Peace, joy, and happiness came by the hand of God because of the actions of Esther and Mordecai here, which again we've seen played out, going all the way back to Queen Vashti and her refusal to perform for the king and his men in chapter 1, that led to Esther even being considered to be a queen. So we can see the hand of God throughout all of this. And again, the word God and the word Lord is not anywhere in the book of Esther, but he's on every page of the book of Esther. The hand of the Lord working behind the scenes to put in action these things to protect his people. Now, chapter 10 is just some final closing words on Mordecai, which we will read and then be done.
And the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land, and upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed.
So I think a good name would be Mordecai for a boy. We don't use that name anymore. I don't know that I know any Mordecais, but anyway. But we see here that King Ahasuerus allowed Mordecai again to be second in command, and that's really all we know about Mordecai from this point. Yeah, he had decreed that Mordecai would be hanged, or Haman did. Who are you talking about? I guess.